LM Radio was South Africa's only music radio station which started broadcasting in 1936 and set the standard for adult contemporary radio from 1950 to its close in October 1975. Chris Turner talks to some of the people who made LM Radio the #1 music station. Today he is talking to Rob Vickers.
Rob, you were recruited for LM Radio when you lived in Australia and you were working in the theatre, is that correct?
Yes, more or less. I had been working in the theatre and in Brisbane, and I was in a series of musical shows up there, and at the same time I was doing breakfast show on 4BH in Brisbane. This is going back a few years, and then the series of theatre shows came to an end, and I went back to Sydney and decided that I was going to London to make my fame and fortune, and little realising that it was going to happen in South Africa, but still, that's what was the original idea. And a friend of mine, Bernard Lynch, who had a girlfriend in Sydney, and she worked in some kind of agency, and went to Bernard one day and said, I've got 2 wonderful jobs going in Africa. I'm suggesting that you, to Bernard, and she mentioned me, Rob, apply for it. You'll get the job because you're both experienced. Bernard had worked on 2SM at those days, and you'll get the job, and you'll see Africa. So we thought about it, and I said, I'm not so keen on going to Africa. And then we looked up where it was, Lorenzo Marx in those days, and which is now Maputo. And anyhow, I said, no, I don't want to go to Africa. I want to go to London. So, but Bernard went, and he kept in touch with me, raved about Lorenzo Marx radio, and eventually I decided I'd been working in England, but I couldn't take the cold anymore, and so I said, I'm going back to Australia. And he said, there's a job going here in Lorenzo Marx. Why don't you apply for it? You'll get it. Second time somebody said, I'll get it. So anyhow, I thought, all right, I'll go. I must say, that's when I met Richard Mayer, and who was the brains of, more or less, or part of the brains anyhow, of the early LM days. And he auditioned me, and I went home. My mother was living in London, and I went home, and she said, how did it go? I said, oh, forget it, I'm not going to Africa. I'll never get that job. With that, I'm talking to my mother, and the phone rings. It's Richard Mayer.
He was a colonel then, wasn't he?
A colonel, yes. He wouldn't have said Richard, he would have said Colonel Mayer. He was until about 1956, when the war had been over 10 years or more. David Davies eventually told him that the war was over, dropped the colonel. You stood at attention when he called you into his office. And he never said, sit down. You stood to attention. That'll be all, Vickers. Out you went. Anyhow, typical Dick Mayer, he said, I have booked you on the Langeby Castle. This is about 3 in the afternoon. I had the audition at 1. And he gave me the dates, and call round tomorrow, you'll get your contract and everything else that you need. It's just like that.
This is before you'd even accepted, was it?
Yeah, and I had just done the audition. All right, you go for an audition, you expect to accept. But I thought the audition was very difficult. He had me doing everything except circus acts, I think, to get into radio. Anyhow, to make a long story short, I came, and so that's how that started.
But I remember you telling me that your mother conspired to actually get you on that ship at the end, didn't she?
Very much so, along with a very, very dear friend of mine. I had friends, family friends. One of them, there were 4 daughters and 1 son in this family, and the father was a jeweller and had a very expensive shop in Sydney. And but one of his daughters, Joan, went through drama school with me in Sydney, and we got along very well. We've been friends ever since. And of course I met the whole family. In fact, the jewellery shop where you could pick up little trinkets for a couple of thousand or a couple of $100,000, these poor out-of-work actors used to meet for coffee somewhere. And anyhow, Madeline, one of Joan's sisters, was older than Joan, and she also, the whole family, with the exception of Joan, worked in the jewellery store. But Madeline came to say goodbye to me, and I hadn't packed. I had this feeling that I was not going to England after all. Contract in my pocket, the ticket and everything, I'm not going. So my mother had a few words with Madeline. She walked into the lounge room. Right, where's your trunk? In those days, if you went on a ship, you had a cabin trunk.
Yes, it was one big tin trunk.
That's right. You needed 3 people to lift it for you. And so, is it packed? I said, no, I'm not going. Where's his things? Where's the underwear? Where's the socks? Where's the shirts? Where's the this, that, and the other thing? And before I knew where I was on the taxi going to the ship, the Langeby Castle.
Langeby Castle.
Yeah.
And then you sailed off to Lorenzo Marx and.
Well, I actually got off in Durban by arrangement, and I was met there at Durban by a representative from LM Radio and taken to Johannesburg to meet the various, because that's where the managing agents, Richard Mayer, and several of his directors were working. And so they put me on. And I must say, as a company, LM Radio was first class all the way. I came out first class on the ship. I got the first class ticket on the train, and whenever we travelled, we stayed at the top hotels, which was wonderful. I wish we could say the same things about broadcasting today, you know, but still, it was, and that was the beginning of it all. I was taken to Lorenzo Marx and hated it. Hated it. I've never hated a place so much. What have I done? Then I couldn't get out of it. The second day that I was there, I went and booked my passage the day after my contract right back to Sydney, you see. But those days we only had ships to travel on. And but 3 months later, I just wakened up and I thought, this is great. This is marvellous.
And Bernard was there with you, was he?
He was there for about another year or so. And then he went back to Australia and got out of radio completely, went into advertising, and I haven't heard from him since.
Now, on LM Radio, you played the role of 2IC to David Davies for many years, didn't you?
That is correct. He made me his 2IC, and I joined, well, it was... We left London on Good Friday, so about 2 weeks later was when I got to Africa.
And that was 1951.
In 1951, and it would have been after Easter, April, May, something like that. And at the end of the year, David came to me and he said, I want you to be my 2IC. So that's how that happened. I don't know what David saw in me, but he saw something, and that's how it happened. Eventually I was made the manager of the studios in Johannesburg. But and we recorded everything in Johannesburg that we had to go, because in those days private radio was not allowed in South Africa.
Yes. If I could take you back to the early days in Lorenzo Marx, you had a number of women who worked on the station who were actually pioneers in radio broadcasting in Southern Africa, weren't they?
Yeah, part of the pioneering group, I suppose. Evelyn Martin, not Evie, Evie came along and it became very well known, as people in South Africa would know. But at that time she had a job in the office, nothing to do with radio. But Valerie Mayer was the girl who had been educated in South Africa, and she was working on LM radio, and Afrikaans hadn't become, was not used particularly on LM radio in those early days. We started out with Valerie doing children's broadcasts and children's birthday greetings.
Yes.
You know, we had a children's program in the afternoon, and then one by one the Afrikaners came up, and of course little kids sometimes were not too bilingual, you know. So she started reading those messages, and then a couple of years later, when I took over Special Occasion, this was around about the time that Valerie left to get married, I think in England, and then we found on the staff Evelyn Martin, who, as I've just mentioned, had an office job, and we found out that she could speak Afrikaans fluently. She's Portuguese background, and she went to, her family lived in Johannesburg then, and she spoke 3 languages, Portuguese, English and Afrikaans. She would never broadcast in Portuguese, her home language, because she said, my Portuguese is the worst language I speak, so she never spoke and that on the air. But her Afrikaans, and she admitted this, was her best language, because her school, although she was Portuguese, she went to an Afrikaans school. So it was the basic language in that school, you see.
Which is why she ended up doing a lot of the bilingual programs.
Oh yes, oh yes. And she became one of our stars.
Yes.
I think there was a press cutting of us once, 3 of us, Eve and David and myself, David Davies and myself, something about the big 3 on LM radio, which was rather nice, and because we met a lot of people by doing in the 60s a lot of variety shows. We had Margate Variety, which was half sort of professional and half amateurs, and then we did an Afrikaans version, and Al Willocks compared that one. David and Evie compared the Margate Variety, and I produced the whole thing. I would go down to Durban once every 3 months, and we would hold auditions, and we'd set the program, and then I'd bring the other 2 down.
Yes.
That's how that happened.
Now, there were some programs which ran for many years on LM Radio, and Special Occasion, you've just mentioned, that was one of them.
Mm.
Now, Special Occasion actually was quite a unique program in that people had to pay to have their messages broadcast, didn't they?
Oh, yes.
Send in a postal order.
It was a postal order for 10 shillings, if I remember rightly, which would be 1 rand, I suppose now. But 10 shillings was 10 shillings. There were more shillings than rands. But yeah, and but we were booked out. It's around Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. We were generally fully booked round about August, September, and we did a Special Occasion on Christmas Eve from 9 o'clock right through until 1 o'clock in the morning, and New Year's Eve we went right through till 2 o'clock in the morning. And who was the broadcaster? Rob Vickers. Evie just recorded her messages, of course, as ladies do. Am I rattling in the background? And yeah, and that's actually how Special Occasion worked. It was wonderfully successful.
Now, there were some other long-running programs. For example, the Hit Parade, which started as the Bayer Hit Parade, didn't it?
That it was Bayer, yeah, to begin with. Then it became, no, it was Atlantic, I think. It was no, wait a minute, I'm getting confused. No, the Atlantic Petrol was the time check, if I remember rightly. But yeah, it ran for a long while.
Because it was started as the Bay Hit Parade, then became the LM Radio Hit Parade, did it? And that's the one that David Davies did.
Your LM, we didn't call it LM Radio, I think it was
LM.
David. David did the Hit Parade, as far as I can remember, even before I was there. But it was not the same. It was the top 8, but we never called it 8.
Yes.
Because in those days, the hit records lasted 2.5 minutes,
Yes.
2 minutes. The very long cut if it was for 3 minutes. Today you get them for half an hour, but you just fade it out when you're tired of it. But that's a different matter.
And David would never allow anybody else to do his hit parade, would he?
Oh yes. I must correct you there. I did it.
You did it, yes.
Sometimes. Bernard did it sometimes. Only if he wasn't there. Obviously it had to be done by somebody.
Yes.
And Evie did it at one stage towards the end, I think.
Yes.
Who else? You know, David retired, whatever the year was now.
I think it was 1969.
Possibly,
Yes.
Around there, yeah. And I don't know who took it over from there.
But now, Rob, at some time in the late 50s or early 60s, you actually left Lorenzo Marx and you moved to Johannesburg.
That was in 60.
Was that 1960?
59.
Yes.
I finished up and started again in 60. It was the end of 59.
And you established a recording studio or
that is right.
A broadcast studio in Johannesburg,
Yeah.
where you would pre-record a lot of the programs.
Actually, we pre-recorded on reel-to-reel tapes, 1-hour tapes for 12 hours a day. 12 hours of the broadcasting day from then on came from Johannesburg, and the other 12, because we'd gone 24 hours a day.
Yes.
And it was Paul Nell who started the all-night show.
Yes.
Paul was a night bird in those days, and he said, yeah, I'd love to do that one, so he did it.
And that was broadcast live, was it, from
That
the
was
studios
live.
in LM?
That was done live in LM. But I left in 67. What happened after then, as far as live and not live is concerned, I
Yes.
really can't say.
But the programs you recorded in Johannesburg, I presume things like Teen Beat, which was your program, and the Hit Parade, was that recorded in Johannesburg, or was that done live?
Generally speaking, the Hit Parade was done live, but there were times when it was recorded.
So David would actually go down to Lorenzo Marx to do the Sunday night broadcast?
Well, David ran 2 homes actually, one in the LM and one in towards the end.
Yes.
Beginning, he lived with his family, his wife and children in Mozambique, and then bit by bit there was more work for David to do with the expansion of LM radio, and he would come up to the offices in Johannesburg and talk to the agencies and meet them all and one thing and another. So that brought him up quite a lot, and eventually he actually moved up to Johannesburg.
Now, Rob, you were quite instrumental in changing the program format of LM radio in the late 50s, early 60s, when you introduced, was it Dial-A-Tune?
Yeah, I'd been to Australia, where I was born, and I kept going home quite frequently, and I found that, you know, there were lots of ideas you could pick up in Australia which fitted well into the South African way of life. So yeah, I did this. I came back with this wonderful idea of going all night, and David and his directors, they said, no, there's no listeners all night. And I said, we've got to go that way. The rest of the world's going it and we're behind. Eventually David got the bug and said, yes, we're going. And so, and that was done live by Paul Nell. He volunteered to do it, and he did a wonderful job, actually. He was a bit of a night owl in those days, and did it. So, and did it very well for a few months, and then handed it over. It eventually became a very good time of the day to train new broadcasters.
Yes.
We had a lot of the guys that became stars later, but you've got to start somewhere, and that was a good starting point.
And a lot of the stations actually do that even now. They use the night shift to...
Well, of course,
yes.
because the listening audience is down, let's face it.
Yes.
But yes, the program that I did, Teen Beat, had to be done to begin with. I recorded it, and then I decided that I could record it, and even they would say, dial a tune now and send in your request, you know, for your hops. And we had telephonists. We had one in Johannesburg, Pretoria, if I remember rightly, and Bloemfontein, Cape Town, East London and Durban. On the air, dial a tune now. If you're in Johannesburg, the number so-and-so. If it's Cape Town, so-and-so. And it worked. It sounded live.
Yes.
And sometimes, if I was in LM, after I actually left, I was living in Johannesburg, but I would go down quite frequently. Then I would do the program from there.
From LM.
Yeah. But yeah, it was just an instant success. The ingredients were right. And let's face it, we had some wonderful stars, which today we don't seem to have stars like them. Maybe that's just an old man talking, I don't know. But Cliff Richard comes to mind, Elvis Presley, the Beatles, you know. And they'd bring often I'd go into the studio and I've just received a small parcel of records. Elvis Presley, I'm going to put it on. I haven't even heard it. You didn't have to hear it. It was Elvis, or it was Cliff, on it went,
yes.
You know. So,
but I was looking at a photograph of you with Cliff Richard.
I was younger then.
From the early
yes.
From the early 60s. So Cliff came out, and you interviewed him and spent some time with him. And did he promote the station at all, or provide you with any program links or promos?
Well, not as such, but he was very cooperative. He would do like I recorded with him a message his first time he came here. We put it on the breakfast show every morning, a message from Cliff, and I recorded it in his room at the Carlton Hotel where he was staying. And he also stopped, I don't know if I've told you this, stopped the traffic in Eloff Street in those days. He stayed at the Carlton Hotel, and the crowd, Johannesburg, knew he was in the hotel, and David and Evie and I were walking into the hotel, and we had to push our way through, and eventually got to the door, which was heavily armed with guards. So didn't want this horde of people inside the hotel, but they knew us, and we got in immediately. And then Cliff walked out onto a tiny little balcony, and the crowd just went mad. Just all the traffic came to a stop. In those days they had trams in the streets,
yes.
And the trams couldn't get through. Nobody got through. And some years later I met him in Brighton, and I was talking to him in his dressing room. He was doing a show there, and I said, you know, Cliff, you're the only artist that's been to South Africa who stopped the traffic in Eloff Street. He said, South Africa's the only country I've ever stopped the traffic in. But Cliff's a wonderful person. It's just natural. Cliff is Cliff.
Yes.
He's as he is on stage, when he's singing, whatever. He's Cliff, and a lovely person to know.
Now, somebody else that you had you had to do with and interviewed was Miss South Africa in the early '60s, Penny Coolen.
That's right, and I took. When she came down there, I recorded her in the grounds of the Polana Hotel, and she was such a lovely person, and still is such a lovely person. She still does a lot of work on TV and radio from time to time, and I think if I remember rightly, she married and had 4 children, but as an older woman, she looks like a younger woman, let me tell you. She's a lovely person.
It's marvellous, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, Rob, just after the demise of LM Radio, well, you left LM Radio in about 1966 or 67, didn't you?
Yeah, it was actually in the January '67.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you then
went to Australia.
You went home to Australia, and then you came back again, and you were again involved with radio, weren't you?
Yeah, these things happen. I don't know how or why, but they do. I had given it up. I thought, no, I've done enough. I became involved with the station. What was it called? It was Izzy Kirsch and his brother.
Izzy and Nati.
Izzy and Nati. But Izzy was the one that loved radio.
Yes.
And then they opened radio, Swazi Radio, which was not a success, but it was technical faults that caused that. They were hoping to compete with LM Radio.
Yes.
And because of the technical faults, it didn't really sort of take off. But there's some very big names who came forth in that program, in that station, and then when that closed down, I somehow or other came into touch with Izzy Kirsch. He took me on, and he had some ideas which he didn't tell me about, but I knew he had some ideas. And then we opened a station called with Izzy, Radio SR, which was the first, I suppose, radio station in Southern Africa that used black announcers, black presenters, with all speaking in English and playing the hits, by and large the American hits, because the record industry in this country hadn't sort of got itself into gear so well. And that was an instant success, sold out.
Because there was nothing on the SABC which served that market, was there?
Exactly.
Yes.
Nothing at all, except their own language, the African language station. But then it was all the very basic American hits and English hits were. Yes.
So this was a station run by African people, but playing the worldwide hits.
Yes, I was their program manager.
Yes.
And I listened to them and knew what they wanted, you know. But you have to have a manager somewhere, you know. And it was a wonderful experience. And they were mobbed. They were stars of the moment.
And then when the Kirsch brothers formed Radio 702, you were the program manager for that?
Well, that's right. I was the first program manager. Armed with the successful, the success of Radio SR, Izzy got more confidence and said, let's go for 702. Well, he didn't use the name. We hadn't worked on that at that stage. And he got a license to operate from Bophuthatswana in Pretoria. And it was something that the government at that time hadn't quite sort of thought would ever happen, but it did. And we got wonderful coverage on medium wave. And
that's how to the PWV area.
That's right. Actually, in this coming month, June, I think I've forgotten the date, but towards the end of the June, 702 celebrates 25 years of successful broadcasting in South Africa.
That's quite an achievement, and you must feel great being part of the
Yeah.
pioneering pop radio in South Africa.
You know, when I was 5, I made up my mind I wanted to get into broadcasting. And so it's been a lifelong dream, and
Yes.
happily I've been able to spend most of that time still with it, training people at the moment.
So I guess we could call you one of the pop radio pioneers of Southern Africa.
Pioneer, I don't mind. There are other words we can forget.
Well, Rob, it's been great talking to you. Thanks very much. And we
Thanks,
know
Chris.
that you're still around in radio broadcasting, training people.
Well, I'm still training, and we see what happens, but one can't go on forever, but still, we'll see.
Well, thank you, and hope that you have all success in the future as well.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for inviting me here.
That was Chris Turner talking to Rob Vickers. Watch out for part 4. Visit www.elmradio.co.mz and check out the historical pages.